My name is Travis Akin. The name of the organization is Illinois Lawsuit Abuse Watch. And basically what we are is an education-oriented group dedicated to educating the public about some of the problems in our legal system. And what a time to be talking about the problems in our legal system. When you look at what's happening in Washington right now with this national health care debate, I think you can all agree that the issue of lawsuit reform has come front and center in the national discussion. Sandra Day O'Connor once observed that there is no shortage of lawyers in Washington, D.C. In fact, she said, there may be more lawyers than people. And when you look at what is going on with this health care debate, I think the power of attorneys in Washington, D.C. Really grabs your attention, especially when you consider that not one of any of the health care bills proposed up to date have anything in those bills about lawsuit reform. Not one. So it's almost as if personal injury lawyers want to pretend that the lawsuit problem has nothing to do with the high cost of health care in this country. It reminds me of that scene in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy and company look and see a rumbling in the curtain. And the wizard says, ignore that man behind the curtain. Well, I'm telling you, we cannot afford to ignore the man behind the curtain any longer. Lawsuits do drive up the cost of health care in this country. And if we are going to have a meaningful solution to a health care problem, then we have to include lawsuit reform. The Pacific Research Institute estimates that malpractice legal system costs the nation about $200 billion a year. So certainly medical malpractice cases contribute to the high cost of medical malpractice insurance. A few years ago here in Illinois in 2005 we passed a meaningful and comprehensive medical malpractice reform bill that had caps included and some meaningful legal reforms in that bill, and it's been working. But clearly one of the reasons we had to pass that bill was because the high cost was driving doctors out of the state. People couldn't get the health care they expected and quite frankly deserved. But lawsuits also contribute to the practice of what's called defensive medicine. In 2003, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimated that the practice of defensive medicine, such as tests and extra procedures doctors only order to protect themselves, costs anywhere from $70 billion to $126 billion a year. The Massachusetts Medical Society asked 900 doctors in the state if they practiced defensive medicine last year, and a whopping 83% said they had practiced defensive medicine, and the cost of that defensive medicine cost about $1.4 billion last year. So we cannot ignore what is clearly in front of our face. While personal injury lawyers want to live in this pretend world where lawsuits have nothing to do with medical malpractice costs or the cost of medicine and health care in this country, consider this. A recent study conducted by the Campaign Media Analysis Group and sponsored by the U.S. Chamber for Institute for Legal Reform found that the rate of television advertising by medical malpractice law firms has, surprise, surprise, grown exponentially in the last 5 years. According to this study, it jumped from, in 2004, 10,150 ads to more than 150,000 commercials in 2008. That's nearly a 1,400% increase in just 4 years. So on the one hand, they want to try to tell you, oh, the medical malpractice lawsuits have nothing to do with the cost of health care. But at the same time, they're spending billions and millions of dollars advertising, trying to solicit more lawsuits. So you see what's going on here. People who believe that medical malpractice lawsuits have nothing to do with the health care costs in this country are probably very likely to believe that a government-run health care system will not cost taxpayers any money. John Adams, I think, said it best. He said, in my many years, I have come to a conclusion that 1 useless man is a shame, 2 is a law firm, and 3 or more is a Congress. We cannot expect to have effective health care reform without lawsuit reform? Why can't we have special health courts to adjudicate malpractice claims? Why can't doctors email with patients for a small fee? And then if they have to come in, they come in. But in this litigious environment, that will never work. Why can't we create an environment where doctors can trust their own opinions and not have to constantly order test after test after test? Philip Howard, the founder of Common Cause, wrote in a recent column, "Creating a reliable malpractice system with special health courts will not solve all the problems of healthcare, but it will solve some. Reliable law is also a necessary foundation for other changes in the culture of healthcare delivery. Persuading doctors to use email with patients not only requires a new reimbursement system, Britain now pays doctors more for using email, but also requires a system of justice that reliably supports doctors who use this imperfect but highly productive form of communication. Congress should listen to doctors and patients. They see these problems with modern healthcare. The fact that it's hard to score the precise savings doesn't mean that the changes are unimportant. I recall the statement attributed to Einstein, not everything that is important can be measured, and not everything that can be measured is important." Even if Congress does enact some reforms, which I think is highly unlikely, we need to change the culture of this country. There's no better example of the culture of lawsuit abuse than a recent lawsuit I read about in the pages of the Chicago Tribune and Chicago Sun-Times just a few weeks ago. A woman, about a year ago, was at the Brookfield Zoo, and she was walking past an exhibit where they had dolphins in, their swimming tanks, and they were doing tricks and putting on a show for the zoo patrons. And she walked past this display, and she claims in her lawsuit filed just a few weeks ago that the dolphins deliberately splashed her, causing her to slip and fall. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have children, if you heard, I do have children. When you take your kids to the zoo, what is going to happen with this lawsuit is there are going to be new rules in place. They're going to rope things off. They're going to obstruct the view. And it's going to make it an inconvenience for every person that goes and sees the dolphins jump around and play. The fact that the dolphins do jump and splash is precisely why we go to see them. But yet, a grown woman can blame the dolphins and the dolphins' caretakers for her negligence and her slipping and falling. This is the kind of culture that we live in. This is the kind of country we have become. iLaw as an organization has as its focus the education of the public about these issues. We talk a lot about the culture, and we talk a lot about the need to not only change the laws, but to change our environment and the culture around us. If we are going to have meaningful lawsuit reforms, we need to change the attitudes we have towards lawsuits, making lawsuits a last resort, not our first option. We are an advocate for personal responsibility. Tom mentioned in his presentation about the importance of personal responsibility. But sadly, personal responsibility and self-government are under assault today. I think one of the founding reasons why we were all here today is because we want government to leave us alone. We want government off our back. And we want to be able to be responsible for ourselves and our own actions. This is what Illinois Law Student Group Washington strives to accomplish every day. When I go on a radio show, when I talk to a reporter, talking about personal responsibility is something I take very, very seriously. Ronald Reagan said in 1964, "It's time we asked ourselves if we still know the freedoms intended for us by the Founding Fathers." James Madison said, "We base all our experiences on our experiments on the capacity of mankind for self-government." This idea that government was beholden to the people, that it had no other source of power, is still the newest, most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government, or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. This idea of liberty, this idea of personal responsibility, it is under assault, and it's up to us to reclaim it. And that is why I think it's great that we're all coming together as grassroots activists to promote the idea of freedom and liberty.